Okay, I am here with David Grogan. He was a colleague of mine when I worked at the University of Texas at Arlington. He's an amazing singer, and we have so much to learn from him as flutists. Breathing is really the same for singers and flute players, so I cannot wait to hear what David has to say. David, would you introduce yourself a little bit more for everybody watching?
Absolutely. Like Terry said, I'm David Grogan. I'm a baritone and I sing in the mostly in the oratorio world. I've kind of avoided opera for my whole life because it just takes too much time and I don't want to memorize that much music. And I started we started having children. My wife and I had children really quickly after we got married, and it was like, do I want to be gone for a month at a time? And I just said nah. So I discovered a different path for myself, and that's been great because it allows me to teach and sing as much as I want, and that's really fantastic.
Nice. That's kind
But
of something you and I
oh,
have
go
in.
ahead.
Yeah, I thought originally I wanted to just do orchestra, 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 but there's so much more in life, and we can all just design our own paths.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's more than one route, and I have friends who do nothing but professional choir work, and they travel around from professional choir to professional choir. And that's not for me, but it is a thing that you can do absolutely, and it's beautiful. So I'm
Well,
a recovering choir director, and so I love the choral scene. I love oratorios because it always involves a choir, and I love that music. My original intention was to be a choir director, and I did it for a decade, and I hated my life so much that I had to change my path.
we all have to find what works for us.
Amen.
And I just want to say your voice is so beautiful and so distinctive. And I'm going to put a link down in the
Oh, sure.
description box of a piece that you and I did together when
Oh,
I was
yeah,
working
yeah,
at UTA. Yeah.
yeah.
But
Absolutely.
let's get into the main topic.
Okay.
Breathing in my mind is almost exactly the same for singers as it is for flute players. I always say that flute players are singers. We just have this
Hmm.
fancy silver tube that makes us sound like flute players. And of course, we don't have the words, which I'm a little sad about. Sometimes we can add our own words in our mind. But I just want to listen to maybe some foundational thoughts that you have. If you had a freshman student come into your studio and they were struggling with breathing, what kind of things would you start off with for them?
Okay, sure. Sometimes I start by asking people, I'll just say, hey, this isn't a quiz. There's no points deducted for this, but tell me what you know about breathing for singing. Because people come in and they usually know something about breathing for singing. And I like to ask because sometimes what they know is a little bit mixed up and confused. Um, in the singing world, anyway, I find that the instruction that they get, um, they it doesn't come to them with the distinction between, hey, this instruction is regarding inhalation and this instruction is regarding exhalation. There's just kind of breathing, and there are two parts to breathing. Let's don't forget that there's inhale and there's exhale. Yes, and they're different. They're different actions. The air is moving in different directions, and we have to uh, distinguish when we're getting instruction about breathing, which part of it is we're actually doing. Okay, that seems really simple, but in the singing world anyway, it's surprising how many things that, like, a teacher will give instruction about inhaling, and the student will try to apply that to when they're actually singing, when they're exhaling.
Mm.
And that causes all sorts of weird issues and weird conceptual things about breathing to mix up students. So I like to start with asking first, just so I can hear it in their own words, what they think about breathing. And you'll hear a lot about, well, breathe low. Okay. And so I'll say, hey, tell me what that means to you. And they tell me, and sometimes it's like, okay, that's spot on. Yeah, excellent. Or it's not quite right, and we'll say, I want to add some nuance to what you just said. That's really great. I'm glad you know that. And sometimes it's just like wildly inaccurate. And so it kind of depends on the student's needs what I teach them. But there are some basic things that I think are important. And if you don't mind, I'll just jump right into them.
Please. Yeah, this is exactly what will be helpful. Thank you.
Sweet. I first off, I want to say I know nothing about flute. My oldest brother was a flute player in high school, and I think somewhere when I was maybe 10, I learned a B flat scale. But I lost that. Being almost 60 now, I don't remember that anymore. But I know good playing when I hear it, and I do understand that yes, without breath no music happens for a flute or a singer, right? This is like we are
Right.
dependent 100% on our breath, and the quality of the breath is going to improve the quality of our performance.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me just giving you a bit of context,
Do it.
flute players often have a lot of misconceptions about breathing too. In high school band, in particular, a lot of brass playing band directors
Yeah,
will give breathing exercises. And on the one hand, I love them because it opens their minds up to how much oxygen the lungs can actually
yeah,
facilitate. On the other hand, they do these funny exercises that add a lot of tension in the throat
yeah,
and the
yeah.
tongue. And so a lot of the flute playing breathing projects have to do with softening and making it more healthy and natural.
That sounds just like what we do in voice world as well. So
Perfect.
that's great. I love that. That's good information. Um, I've watched the breathing gym videos, and they're excellent, and only a small part of it is really applicable to singing, because of the. I think the guy who created those was actually a tuba player, and tubas use so much insane amounts of air that it's just kind of overkill for singers anyway.
Yes. Oh, overkill. So
Yeah.
just as you're talking, for you to keep in mind, flute players often think that they have to tank up and
Uh-huh.
that they have to be very aggressive to find power. And so
Yeah.
I think the overlap is almost exact,
Right.
resonance, not forcing.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So, um, for me, one of the most fundamental foundational parts of inhaling, okay, has to do with the idea of taking in a low breath. And so let's just talk about what that means. That means that when you breathe in, you're going to have an expansion in your abdomen. Okay. There are a number of ways you can breathe in, and belly breathing is one of those ways that you can do it. It's advantageous for singers because when you do that, the diaphragm is what makes that happen. So the diaphragm sits in the gut, kind of like this, kind of like an upside down bowl. It's a wall. It's a wall that separates your lungs from everything down below, which I always say that's really good. I don't want my lungs hanging out with my intestines. That just seems unsanitary for some reason. I don't want my breathing stuff to be close to all of that nastiness. And so it's a wall that separates, and when the diaphragm contracts, it presses down and it pushes on your viscera. And the only place that they can go to get out of the way of this oncoming wall is out towards the front. That's the softest area, that's the most expansive or expandable, and so it moves forward. So what we're seeing is not air coming into your stomach as was described to me when I was in high school. That's misinformation. Air is not going into your stomach. If that happens, you're going to burp later. That's just not true. So the air is actually going into your lungs, but the diaphragm is moving away from your lungs and pressing down on your viscera. And so that we see that, and it's nice to be able to see it. Um, as singers, we don't get to see a lot of the very important parts of our instrument because they're locked up in our throat, and that's a real challenge for us. And so when we find parts that we can monitor, that we can see, it's super helpful. Um, just mechanically, why this is important or why this helps: when the diaphragm moves away from the lungs, it lowers the air pressure inside the lungs because there's now more room, there's more space around the lungs, which causes air to get sucked into the body because low pressure areas get filled up by high pressure air. Yeah. There's nothing magical inside your lungs that really works to pull air in, other than the fact that stuff around the lungs moves away from them, creating more space. So, body expansion, or I mean, it feels like more expansion than it probably is, but the expansion of the gut, expansion of the rib cage is an inhalation move.
Mhm.
Widening of the torso will lead to inhalation, basically.
Yeah, in my flute playing philosophy, when I'm teaching new students, I often call it the path of least resistance because
Yeah.
that low air pressure creates a lot of synergy with the air
Mm.
in the room versus trying to force the mechanism.
Yes, and in this particular part of breathing in, because the diaphragm works well, it's an automatic part of our breathing system. It has to work while we sleep. We don't have to think about breathing, right? We do when we're playing, when we're singing, we have to think about breathing. And that's kind of strange because breathing is automatic. It happens all the time when you're not paying attention or when you're unconscious. We absolutely breathe. And so the diaphragm doesn't send a signal to the brain that it's doing the work. So
Mm.
if you're doing a diaphragmatic inhalation, there's no, it almost feels like it happens to you rather than you did something to breathe.
Yes, like you
Yeah,
receive it.
absolutely. You're receiving it, and it's just like, I've been possessed, and now I have air in my lungs. That's really interesting. And it's sometimes I find that for singers, they try so hard to breathe in that they do it in interesting ways that is not necessary, that causes more tension. And again, so much of what we're doing, like you said, is trying to find things to soften, to relax, to make it easier. And so this is really good. And I call that part of the breath the splat breath.
I remember that from your presentation. Yes, that's one of my
Yep.
favorite parts.
So
Yep.
like I wore a shirt that has stripes in it, so you can see. So when I breathe that way, it expands there, and I'm not trying to expand it. It just does it on its own. It's important, I think, in that part of the breath that it feel um yeah, like you didn't do it. It just
Hmm.
happens. It won't happen if your abdominal muscles are tight.
Hmm.
This is super important. If you're holding in your stomach, like we all do all the time, because we've been socially manipulated to hold in our stomach all the time, because letting things show in our stomach is like taboo. We don't want people to
Hmm.
notice our stomach. Every once in a while, I'll have a student who's come from a ballet background, and they really hold that in, and it's really difficult to get them to breathe diaphragmatically because they're just constantly holding that in. It's very rigid and very tight, and that's important to the art of ballet, but it's like detrimental to singing and probably to flute playing.
So, yeah, well, so flute players, to get core in our sound, like
Yeah,
the center of the sound, often to get core, we engage our core,
yeah,
but that is on the exhalation. And so
exactly so.
it's hard to get them to soften for the inhalation.
Exactly so. And so that's why I like to focus on that part first. Let's do that part first. Um, a further advantage, and I bet it helps with flute playing too. But there's an important part to singing that involves the throat, and it really helps to have a relaxed throat when you do this. But one of the things that's important, where the vocal cords are, is in the Adam's apple or the larynx, and that's where the sound starts for us. That's the vibrating part of our instrument. It has the ability to move up or down. And if
Hmm.
it moves down, we just increased our resonant tube. We just made it longer. And that increases the depth of sound. And if it moves up, we've just reduced the length of our resonating tube, and that decreases and it changes the timbre. But I imagine that just like singing, the stuff that's below the vibrator in the source, from the source of the breath to the vibrator, also are important. right? I imagine in flute playing, what happens in the mouth, what happens in the throat is also important. What happens below the resonator for singers is also important. There's a whole concept that singers sometimes talk about called tracheal resonance, which is below where the
Mm.
vibration happens. And it's fascinating. But anyway, just I'm saying all this to say when you do a diaphragmatic breath, I'm going to add a caveat here, and you're upright and you're on a planet that it has gravity. Okay. Okay. This is important. When all of those things are true, the diaphragm goes down. Right before the diaphragm went down, the lungs are actually sitting on the diaphragm. They touch.
Mm.
And so when the diaphragm goes down, the lungs have lost that support and they literally drop because of gravity.
Oh,
They drop down. And if you're upside down, this is not true. But if you're right side up, if you find yourself playing flute upside down, consider your life choices. But the lungs go down, so does the trachea, and the trachea is attached to the larynx, and the larynx goes down every time you breathe in, if you breathe in this way for free. So it's
yes.
like something we want. It automatically happens at the beginning of every breath.
So, okay, I have to insert this.
Yeah,
There's this image that I use a lot in my own playing and for students. I feel like flute players are like marionette puppets,
yeah,
and the shoulders and the elbows and the back of the tongue and the voice box, it all
yeah,
just is either up or it's
yeah,
down. And so
yeah.
using or allowing gravity is huge. When you add in what you just said about the lungs, it makes it like the full picture of how gravity is part of it.
Absolutely, and allowing gravity to take its effect on you and letting your body feel more grounded and more relaxed. Like right now, my shoulder is messed up because, oh, hey, any young flute players out there, you're going to reach a certain age when you wake up and you're like, wow, I really hurt. And the only thing you can figure out why you hurt is because you slept funny. And I swear to you, the reason I'm injured right now in my shoulder is because I've been knitting. So this is
You
this
have a
is
knee
this is
injury.
what happened. I have a knitting injury, and oh, anyway. So, but yes, this is super important. Allowing the gravity to have its impact on you and not fighting it, letting it go. Sometimes I talk to my students about imagine that you have extra gravity on you, and it's just pulling your body down. Let it happen. And you feel heavier when you do relax those muscles that are kind of holding us upright and fighting the gravity. When you let those go, it can feel a little bit like, hey, there's extra gravity on me right now. That's an
Mhm.
image that I like to use. But yeah, this is a beneficial thing. And it's kind of like we have to breathe all the time in our world uh, to make our craft happen. And it's kind of like when things go wrong with an electronic device like a computer, sometimes everybody says, hey, just turn it off and turn it back on. We reboot our system at every breath.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And so things can go wrong in the middle of a phrase, and we're just like, well, that's not going the way I want it to. But guess what? I just reset, and everything's back to normal.
Can I steal that phrase? Every breath is a reboot.
It's a reboot. Let's go.
Every That's
Absolutely.
so
Steal
good.
away. Steal away. And so that's really important, I think, for longevity, at least for singing, and for timbre reasons. It just helps us a lot. And it's something that once it's habitual, it really, really helps us as singers. It is not, however, that kind of breath is not the only kind of breath that we can take. And I think for, well, many times we are required to sing and play really long phrases. And we
Mm.
need a little bit more air than what a diaphragmatic breath will allow us to do. So to me, there's a second part of this inhaling equation that involves the rib cage.
Mhm.
Okay, because there is a little bit of expansion in the rib cage when you do the diaphragmatic thing, the splat breath, but there's more that can be had. And this has to be more of an intentional breath. It won't happen automatically. You have to go beyond the norm or beyond the what happens like when we're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And it involves expansion of the rib cage, and the rib cage has two different muscles on it. And my apologies to my vegan and vegetarian friends, but ribs are delicious. And when you're eating ribs, there's two sets of muscles, and there's a set of muscles that helps expand the rib cage in 3 dimensions, and there's a set of muscles that contracts the ribs in 3 dimensions. So we have an inhaling set of muscles and you have an exhaling set of muscles. And they are particularly good at making, how do I say this? Because the ribs are connected to the lungs, like they touch each other, there's a sticky substance that connects them together. An expansion of the ribs really expands the lungs a lot. A
Mm.
little bit of a difference in this direction or in this direction with the ribs makes a big difference in how much inhaling force you're creating or how much exhaling force you're creating. And
Yeah, that's so
yeah,
helpful. Do you happen to remember what is that sticky substance
oh
called?
good Lord, I don't
We'll
know,
look it
I
up.
don't remember. Yeah, somebody look it up for us and write it in the comments.
But that
Um,
helps a lot not compartmentalize ribs and lungs, but to realize they're a team.
yeah, they're a team, and so the expansion of the rib cage is important to that second part of breathing. So we get that first, that lower splat breath, and then we keep going, and we
Mm.
feel expansion of the chest, so that it feels like to the user, it feels like to the person doing the breathing that you're filling up from the bottom. It starts at your waist level and starts to come up. We don't want to raise the shoulders as we do this. You could. That is another way of taking in air. You can actually use your shoulders to raise your rib cage away from your diaphragm, creating more space for the air, or for creating more space around your lungs, creating the inhalation effect. But that causes a lot of tension in the shoulders and the neck that we would like to avoid. So
Mhm.
in the singing world, we call that a high breath, and we're much against it. We don't like it.
Mind if I insert a question here?
Yeah.
Um, so many different flute teachers have different vocab and explanations
Yeah.
and imagery for breathing. And I have a memory of a body mapping oriented flute teacher talking about how the lungs do actually come up a little bit past the collarbones.
Uh-huh.
So I try to explain to my students we don't want to effort the shoulders high, but that there is like a subtle
There
movement. So
is.
we also don't want to effort them down.
Yeah, like an
Yeah.
expansion that goes in this kind of realm here, but doesn't involve up and down at the shoulder level.
So my question is, do you have anything you say to your students about sort of the natural allowance of this area?
Well, yeah, actually, I do talk a little bit about allowing the rib cage to expand. So we have these two different muscles that are in the rib cage, and anytime you have muscle groups that work in opposition to each other, and that's what these muscle groups do, right? They're doing opposite things. That's a lot of our body.
Hmm.
Bicep does this action, tricep does this action. They work in opposition to each other. If those muscles work at the same time
Hmm.
equally, what you get is stasis. You get something holding rigidly in one place. If I tighten my bicep and my tricep, my arm is locked. It won't move anymore either direction. And sometimes people, in trying to breathe, activate both muscles and then their ribs don't move at all.
Yes.
And when that happens, usually it's followed with raising of shoulders because their body's like, well, you're telling me to get more air in, and so the only way I can do it now is to raise up my shoulders. And so when I see high breathing, I know it's either tightness in the stomach muscles and the abdominal muscles or tightness in the rib cage. And so we talk about, okay, let's allow those rib cage the rib cage to expand. And fortunately, it's an easy thing to monitor. You can put your hands on it. You can look in a mirror, and you can see if that is actually happening. And that's really good. So it's important to notice it and get to know what these things feel like. What does it feel like when my diaphragm is in action and I have this abdominal distension that suddenly happens without my will? And what does it feel like when I allow my rib cage to expand? And where do I feel the expansion? Some people notice it more on the side, especially in the lower parts of the ribs. Sometimes I
Mhm.
like to draw attention to where the sternum is and the idea of the sternum coming out. Um, Back in the day, when people would run in track and field, the winner was determined by a piece of red tape that was stretched across the finish line, and the person who ran and stuck their chest and you would see them because that's how you knew they won, is because they had the tape across their chest, and that kind of extension is when you're taking a really full breath, you should have some sort of expansion there. Um, I keep, wait, hold on. I keep a thing in my office that helps with the image of that. And this is the winged victory statue that sits in the Louvre. And she is known for, uh, she was also often talked about in teachers of singing, would talk about her posture and this notion of that. And I will use the image of wings, and I'll say, hey, imagine that you have wings on the back, and think where they would insert into your back, and imagine that you're about to fly. You're getting ready to fly. What do your wings do?
Mhm.
And then what that does to your chest, because involving bringing the sternum out a little bit involves slightly tilting and squeezing the scapula in the back where the wings would be, right? Where the wings would be. And that helps with postural things as well.
Yeah. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I do notice anytime the phrase lift the chest or
Uh-huh.
even just the word expansion, there's a potential ripple effect of compressing the lower back. So
Sure.
I don't know like what you include in your wing description about that.
Yeah, because it's not always really clear. I got instruction as a younger person about pulling my shoulders
Hmm.
back, and that, boy, that can turn into too much really
Hmm.
quick. And so I like the gentle idea of just preparing to fly. It has that moment of something's about to happen, right? You're
Yeah.
about to engage in movement, and so there's less rigidity. I can't say that word. Um,
That
so
makes sense.
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
I like that. I don't know about in the world of flute pedagogy, but in the world of vocal pedagogy, there have been centuries of language that have been passed down from teacher to student, and a lot of them are very vague
Yes. Hmm.
things, and so we'll hear people, just give seemingly nonsensical instruction that ends up being helpful, can end up being helpful, but a lot of times is not. And so I have spent the last few decades really thinking about, is there a better way to talk about this? What can we say that's actually going to be better for students that might actually lead them to understand? Because sometimes what comes out of a teacher's mouth has an intention of this, and it goes into the students' ears and brains and turns into something else. And then they pass that down to their students, and we get a lot of confused
Absolutely.
students.
And I think that's why you and I have historically gotten along so well because we're always thinking, like, what's the actual
Uh-huh.
meaningful thing to say? 'Cause,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, just like you described in vocal pedagogy, I think what happens in the flute world is we've had these incredible players.
Yep.
And they have certain things that they think about and they share it with somebody who's maybe pretty high level. But then it gets kind of distilled and different teachers start to make it the gospel truth
Yeah.
without actually factoring in that person's mind or that person's
Yeah.
body. And then it gets weird.
and then it gets weird. That's right. I absolutely the truth. And and there's more than one way to skin a cat, if you will, and so that's confusing too. I think to a lot of students, kind of depends on the student's needs and how they react to words and different types of instruction. And so you'll see one student be wildly successful with a method, and another student not get very much success with a method, and then they try a different teacher with a different approach, and all of a sudden they're doing really beautifully.
Yes, and I definitely want to give you the space to finish whatever thoughts you have about inhalation, exhalation, foundational. But just before we keep going with that,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on students or aspiring musicians finding their own way in, like taking the breathing advice,
Yeah.
but then doing their own experiments with their body? Anything that you tend to say about that?
So I think it is so important. And I was just sitting here thinking, I don't know that I've said this for a hot minute in my studio with my students, but I used to say it a lot more, and maybe I should go back to it. That it's one of the most important parts in your practice time, at least as a singer, is to do this wild experimentation, to
Yes.
try and fail, to try and succeed, to try and go, huh, I don't know, and then to try again. Um, so many times in my personal path as a learning singer, I try something and go, well, that's interesting. I don't know that. Let me do that again. Let me try a little bit different thing, and sometimes even do some stuff that's like mildly vocally dangerous, maybe, and that's okay. That's all right. This is one of the ways that we learn, and I think it's super important that you don't just take as gospel every single word that comes out of a teacher's mouth, that you take it and you try it and you go, huh, but what if I do this? What if I do that? And uh, because language doesn't always apply very well to learning a skill, like playing the flute, like singing, like playing golf, these complex activities that are skill based. We have to explore and find our own way a little bit. I think students should be given that permission to do that. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I need to go back to talking more to my students about, you have the freedom to play around with this, and if you don't, what are you doing in your practice time? You know?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like play around.
We can never say it enough. And I hope anybody watching this video really takes this to heart.
Yeah,
Until you go try something for yourself and
yeah.
until you embody it, it's not, you can't really learn it anyway because you don't really understand the context and the nuance of the words the teacher said. You have to go find the reality of it.
As learners of skills, we all have experienced the idea of a sudden epiphany when the words that the teacher has been saying suddenly make sense, and you're like, "Oh, I get it now." Right? Because learning to do these things is not something that you could just read a book about and then,
Mhm,
oh, well, now I know how to play flute. No, you have to experience it
mhm,
and gain experiential knowledge, if you
mhm.
will. So that, and that takes practice and that takes experimenting, and absolutely, that's a really important part of this. Um, I yeah, that's really important. And like for example, just in playing around with these sorts of breathing ideas that we've already been talking about, I'll say to students, hey, take a second now. And I know that we've said we're going to start with a splat breath and then we're going to expand our ribs after that. But just for a second now, hold your stomach still and only breathe using your ribs. Focus
Mm.
on that. Oh, that's different feel. That feels very different. I'm intentionally tightening my stomach so that I can, so that we gain experience in what this feels like. There are a couple of things in these sort of skill based things like singing and well and just breathing right now. I mean, is breathing a
Mhm.
skill? I guess if you're going to do it a certain way, breathing is a skill. You should breathe every day. Don't forget.
Don't
Uh,
forget.
don't forget. It's really important. Some every day. But there, sometimes we need to build strength, and sometimes we need to just build coordination and understanding of what certain things feel like. What does it feel like when I give 10% more energy in an exhalation? What does it feel like in my body? What does it feel like if I need like 20% more? Yeah. What does
Yeah.
that do to my rib cage? What is that doing to my stomach? Where am I? Where is the energy? Um, I keep, back in the day, I used to, my voice teacher used to take my hand and stick it right on her stomach. Feel how I'm doing this, and I'm like, ah. And
Um,
today we don't generally speaking, most voice teachers don't do that sort of thing.
mhm.
And yet it can be really important to think about those sorts of things. And so I keep a doll. I keep Prince Eric from the Little Mermaid right next to me, and I say, okay, well, show me on the doll where you feel the energy. Because it's like or show me on yourself. But I'll talk about, hey, this is where you'll feel the energy. It's right here on Prince Eric. I can touch Prince Eric, and he
So,
won't sue me.
um, I can hear everything you're saying, but your screen did freeze a minute
Ah,
ago.
okay. Let me turn off my video and turn it back on. Let's see if
You're
that
back.
works.
You're
I'm
back.
back. Oh,
I
back.
didn't know if you
Wow.
were
Thank
pointing
you.
thing. Yeah.
Thanks for, yeah, Prince Eric. Okay. Anyway, yeah, we go. He got energy right here. Um, so that, I think that's important. It's experimenting, knowing what your body is doing. It turns out that we're not really good at noticing what our body is doing, and
Mm,
that's a skill that needs to be worked on, and that's something that is addressed in body mapping sorts of ideas. um, my go-to explanation for students for this is, as I have them think about family events like Thanksgiving or Christmas sort of things where the whole family gets together, and they inevitably, there's one person, usually a mom, who says, hey, let's get together and let's have a group photo because we
mhm,
don't have everybody together. Okay, great. So we have to sit together, and there will be at least one person in the picture who will smile like this.
mhm.
And and you'll hear the mom or somebody go, "That's not your real smile." Right? But in their brain, they're thinking, "Well, what is a smile? You just move the corners of your mouth up and out." And that's not a smile, right? There are more things that are involved in that, and we're not aware of what we do all the time.
Yes.
One word that's very popular in vocal pedagogy circles is proprioception, the
Mhm,
idea of knowing what your body is doing, where it exists in space, and how
mhm.
this is something we literally have to work on, and we have to get better at if we're going to be good and in this craft,
Mhm.
because we're just not naturally good at it.
We may have to do a part two of this video because I have so many follow-up questions and we don't I only have the 1 hour, so we'll have to do a part two sometime.
Amazing. Yes, please.
I want to make sure that everything that you want to say about inhalation, exhalation, foundations, we kind of started and mostly talked about
We
inhalation.
did. I'm ready to go into exhalation. Let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
Let's go into
Yeah.
exhalation.
Mhm.
So, to me, exhalation is the harder part. Inhalation is the easier part, generally speaking, at least for singers. Um, when we're exhaling for singing, and this may be very different from flute, I don't know. We want to be careful how we portion our air out. We need to
Same.
be, yeah,
Same.
okay, okay, good. So we kind of sort of put the brakes on the airflow a little bit by maintaining some of the inhalation activity that was going on while we are exhaling. And this is wildly crazy to the body. The body doesn't understand this. When we're done inhaling in normal life, the expansion that goes on, those are muscles that are causing that. Those muscles just quit as soon as we're done, and they're done. They're just like, okay, now I'm resting until it's time to breathe in again. And in good singing, we maintain some of that expansion, some of that muscle activity that it keeps the ribs wide, that keeps the diaphragm low. There are two camps about this. Diaphragm is, like we mentioned before, a little bit not controllable.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can tell it to turn on, but it's hard to keep it going after it's done its work. I've seen video footage of like people in an X-ray field breathing at singers, like really good singers, and about half of them were able to maintain the diaphragm in a low position as they sang, and eventually it started to raise back up. And some people of these also good singers, as soon as they started singing their diaphragm, as soon as they quit inhaling, the diaphragm just went up. And so it's hard to do, maybe, and maybe not everybody can do it, but it's possible to keep the diaphragm low for some people. I've seen that. That's
So
interesting.
this might be an interesting point for us to chat about, and it brings up a memory for me. You had a sign on your door. This was years ago, and it
Yeah.
was from, I think, Bel Canto singing.
Okay.
And it talked about the worthy struggle,
Yeah.
how to do with exhalation. And
Yeah.
so then fast forward many years, I made this beautiful breathing sheet with a bunch of tips, including some body mapping things. And one of my friends, who's like our flute playing body mapping expert, Lee Pearson,
Mm.
she pointed out when she read my sheet that like kind of struggling to stay expanded can be at the root of a lot of problems for flute players.
Uh-huh.
So she recommended the phrase slow down the descent.
Yeah.
I'm
Sure.
curious where your thoughts are around that point.
I that's very interesting, and I think the way I've always addressed it is to talk about how this is when this works right, when you do this well, it decreases tension.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a sign to know that you're doing it right. So that when students go, "Wow, that's a lot of work," then they know they're not quite there yet, that they need to keep working on it. But I like the idea of slowing down because it is going to move. It's not rigid, and
Mm-hmm.
rigidity is something that we need to be careful about because that's not going to add to our performance. That's going to
Yeah,
detract
she
from
really
it.
brought to my attention the rigidity temptation
Yeah.
of trying to stay versus just pacing the motion.
I think also that um, for an a closer to an expert level performer, that
Hmm.
kind of information is more important. For the raw beginner, it's going to take a lot of energy and effort just to do it at all. And
That's
they
true.
really may have to overdo at first, and then we relax it down and we go, we okay, now that you're good at this, we can do less of that, and you'll still have just the right amount. You don't the level that we have to do something at the beginning of learning a new skill, it's always harder, and
Mm-hmm.
it should get easier over time. And I think that's an important thing to bring up to students so that they're not always going, well, I know when I first started learning this, I got better when I worked really hard and I sweated and I tightened every muscle. Yeah, that was good then, but now we're past that and now we can do it with ease. I
Yeah,
actually have students, that's something important to me, where I say part of your practice time should be taking something that you're working on and now intentionally make it easier.
I love that.
Yeah.
Ease is so key.
It's so important, and we can. The guy I wrote my dissertation on was a vocal teacher in the 1800s in the United States, and he talked about how it's important that we work on these individual things, right? We work on breathing in, we work on breathing out, we work on just the breathing part, and then we integrate it into our performance. And then we go back and forth between those two concepts of I'm just working on this one thing and I don't care about the other part right now. And
Hmm.
now I'm working on getting it into my routine, which um, eventually is going to be easier and better at the same time. And I always tell my students, if you're practicing and something gets easier and better at the same time, you're absolutely on the right path. I don't care what
Yep.
it is. I don't care. Even if it's like the opposite of what I told you to do, you're on the right path.
Right.
Absolutely. So the exhalation part, there's this notion, an Italian phrase, la lotta vocale, the vocal struggle. And
Mm,
it's the idea of the inhaling energies working against the exhaling energies. They're kind of in a stasis, in a balanced point between those two things. The natural tendency is going to be for us when we start to exhale to allow this collapse to happen. And that is the inhaling muscles just quitting. I have noted for a number of years now the connection between posture and inhaling muscles. Because when we inhale fully, it absolutely changes our posture
mhm,
because the inhaling muscles are expanding our body. And expansion of body is one of the postural elements that we like try for. And
mhm.
and I was told from an early age, sing with good posture. And one way of interpreting that is to say, sing while maintaining inhalation musculature. And that's a really stupid way of saying it, but it's the same thing in a lot of the ways. We're maintaining this width as we sing. And
Mhm.
the purpose of it is to take pressure off of this area right here, which is where our air meets the part that vibrates, that causes the sound to actually happen.
Mhm.
And I imagine in flute playing, there's probably times when there's tension right at the point of embouchure
Yes.
that
Mhm.
is like we don't want that, and maybe we're using that to slow down the air or to do, and it's just causing this extra tension.
Well, not to go off on a different topic, there's some subtleties. The
Yeah.
tension for some people can creep in here, and then we actually
Uh-huh. Oh
centralize
yeah.
it, but that's another thing.
Yeah. So for singers, the you can control the breath a little bit with the inhalation musculature. You can slow that air down
Mhm.
a little bit. It's I've seen a teacher talk about it. It's like riding a bike downhill. You could just do it, just let yourself go. But it's going to be a little bit dangerous, and you're going to get to really high speeds. You're going to have to break that just a little bit, and we break it a little bit by keeping our body a little bit expanded during the process of
Mhm.
exhalation. I think it's important to know that this is not a natural thing. It can feel natural eventually when it becomes habitual, but it's
Interesting.
not something that the body does naturally. I hear a lot of language that frustrates me where people say, well, just breathe naturally. No, no. I Because natural breathing does not help in performing, at least not vocally, and I imagine not in wind instruments as well.
So our language may be a little different. I do like to access, using that word natural, the fact that we have been breathing since we're born.
Yeah,
It is involuntary. I totally get what you're saying. We can't just do the same amount of air we would do for walking around. It's a
right.
lot more than that. But for me, the vocab that helps is not being random or just mindless, but to
Yes.
bring the intentionality
Mm,
to enhance the already natural intuitive process, and it's almost like a superhero version of it.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I use language. Sometimes I talk to my students about caricature artists.
Yes.
I said, like, for example, in vowel placement in singing, we don't sing we sing the caricature version of ah. We don't sing ah. We sing ah, right? And
That's
we
just
can
a
breathe
different
in a caricature way too. This is like ridiculous breathing. Yes, it's a little bit over the top. And
hmm
it's extra.
So
It's
over the top natural.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And to me, the natural part is really talking about the ease in which it happens. It
Mhm.
doesn't feel artificial. This just feels easy. This just feels that way. And it's just not normal for us to maintain a wide body while we exhale. I mean,
Mhm.
that's not something that's hard code written into our body, right? That's
Mhm.
something that's a skill that we have to learn. And skills, when learned and practiced, become easy,
Yes.
and then they feel natural. And I don't know why I got a bee in my bonnet about that, but I do, I do, and it drives me a little bit crazy. But it's the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. We're
Yeah,
just talking about
I think
easiness in performance.
I think you and I are talking about the exact same thing, and my pet peeve goes the other direction, where the band directors are like, kind of, they don't mean to, but they accidentally encourage so much forcing. I'm trying to get everybody back to more
Yeah,
natural, but I think we are saying the same thing.
yeah, yeah. That's right. I think we ultimately want our performing to be something that we can do for hours without tiring ourselves out.
Yeah, sustainable.
Yep, absolutely. And everybody's experienced, especially before you happen to manage to get into a union type thing where there are rules. We've been in ridiculously long rehearsals and with bad technique, with not fully developed technique, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And that's good in a way because I can talk to students about, hey, remember that 4 hour rehearsal you just had? That was terrible. This will help you to be able to do that, and at the end of that rehearsal, not be just exhausted and
Yeah.
then suddenly doing really bad technique because all of your muscles are just they're done. They're
Yeah.
done.
What
Yeah.
what do you think about the image of a rubber band in terms of that sort of, I hate to use the word managed, but
Mhm.
that we've been talking about slowing down the
Yeah.
descent, and what
Yeah.
about that sort of tension image?
So if you take in a certain amount of air, and I can't tell you exactly where that is, it would kind of probably depend on the individual. The
Hmm.
lung sacs expand a little bit like a balloon, and I don't use rubber band, but I do use balloon.
Okay.
And when you reach to that point to where the lung sacs, the alveoli stretch, they have within themselves a certain amount of energy that wants to go out, just like a balloon does. Okay, so that if you just breathe in like we're doing for speaking and just living our every ordinary day lives, that's not enough to really stretch those, so that doesn't count. It's when you go past that certain point.
Hmm.
And those, what happens, they want to go just like a balloon would if you and then let it go. So
Hmm.
keeping the body wide is what slows down that particular part. So for
Hmm.
me, that expansion does not go to the end of the phrase. That
Yes. Yeah.
expansion eventually goes down. And I think this ties in with what we were saying earlier about your colleague that talks about we let this gradually go down.
Yes.
So that for a few seconds, maybe at the beginning, it is just wide, 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 and then it starts to kind of gradually contract.
This might be a great point to end part one on. I don't know if you're game for part two.
Part
There's so much
two!
more to
Woo! I made part two. I'm so excited.
I think this is really good, just digging in like this. I am fascinated by the concept of messa di voce
Yeah.
because that's how flute works. We live in the land of the hairpins. I say follow the rainbow, and
Uh-huh.
what you're saying about it eventually does let go. That's after the crest of the rainbow.
100%. And your needs for exhalation change at that point.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. So if well, we're out of time.
we
Shoot.
are.
But basically something's going to have to contract in the body after that. This will be a preview for the next time.
For sure.
For me, there's two schools of thought in vocal world. One is you allow the rib cage to just contract. The other one is you try to maintain a little bit of that towards the end, and you really focus on the abdominal wall pulling more in. And so we call these two methods up and in. There's a sense of upward motion as the stomach draws in, or
Mhm.
down and out. The stomach stays kind of out and the rib cage moves in. And there are different beliefs about that, and I could talk about that for a
Well,
while.
one thing is for sure, if I did not believe that singing and flute playing were the same in terms of breathing, now I do because
Now you do. Well,
they are
that's so good to know.
It's all the same. I think that just we don't have the words and we don't create all the vibrations right here.
Right.
They go out into the tube.
Yeah.
Everything else is the same.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, I just want to say I'm looking forward to part two already. And if you're a singer or a flute player and you watch this video, will you please put some questions in the comments because
Great
then
idea.
part two, I can ask David these questions and we can continue this really, really good conversation that I think needs to be had.
We love it. We love to talk about breathing.
We do, and it's such a thing. It's such a thing.
It is such a thing. It's
Yeah,
so
thank
important.
you so much, David.
My pleasure. And y'all, don't forget to breathe. Breathe every day.
Breathe, breathe, breathe. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.